This is the Literacy Mindset Podcast, where education leaders discuss identifying and removing phonological barriers with Mindplay's CEO, Jeff Pendleton.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. I'm really excited to have another episode of the Literacy Mindset. My guest today is the Superintendent of Schools in Marietta City, Dr. Grant Rivera. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Jeff. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Really excited to talk through some of the stuff you guys have going on in Marietta and how you think about things. Why don't we first have you tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you got to the role where you're at today?
Yeah, sure. No, I think my story is fairly simple. I started as a special education teacher roughly 26 years ago. And from that point, transitioned into an assistant principal role. And I served as a high school principal for 9 years in a couple different metro Atlanta districts.
Okay.
Served as chief of staff in Cobb County Schools. And now for the last 8 years, I've served as a superintendent here in Marietta City Schools, which is just north of Atlanta.
Awesome. Okay, well, yeah, why don't you give us a little bit more about that? Metro, Atlanta, suburban, kind of tell us some of the dynamics of the district.
Yeah, sure thing. So Marietta, for those who may not be aware, sits just about 30 minutes north of downtown Atlanta.
Okay.
Our district is smaller. We're a city school district. But what that means for us, we have just under 9,000 kids. We have 12 different schools that run the range from pre-K, like a traditional 4-year-old pre-K program, 8 elementary schools. We have a 6th grade academy, a middle school, and a high school. So what's interesting about Marietta is all of our kids feed up through one high school. As you think about our demographics, it's beautifully diverse. We have roughly 40% students who identify as Hispanic, 35% African American, 19% white. 64% of our kids receive free and reduced lunch. And interestingly, in our district and our community, we actually have the highest proportional homeless population relative to Metro Atlanta. So a lot of dynamics that come into play, not just with our kids in our schools, but certainly with their learning.
Yeah, no, that'll be interesting for us to dive into potentially as you think about that. Well, literacy is our main topic. We oftentimes dive in to different elements of that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about just what you have going on from a literacy and reading perspective in the district, and maybe focus it first on Tier 1 instruction. How do you think about core curriculum? Do you push that out of the district, or do you kind of let things be made at the building level, and then we'll take a turn and go towards intervention?
Yeah, so I think to talk a little bit about literacy and core reading program or interventions, I think you first have to understand where we've been. And as I mentioned, I've been here for 8 years. And for the first couple of years, it felt a little bit like the Wild Wild West.
All right.
So we allowed schools to have more autonomy in terms of not only how they taught reading, but the resources they used. I would say there was not a lot of consistency across, in particular, our 8 elementary schools. Okay. And there was a conversation that took place now 4.5 years ago where I got a phone call from the head of the Atlanta Speech School. Atlanta Speech School sits 15 minutes from us. They're considered one of the nation's leading experts in developing the reading brain. And the head of the speech school, the gentleman's name is Comer Yates, and he said to me, hey, where is Marietta in literacy and developing the reading brain? And I said, it's the same thing. It's like, we're all over the place. He said, well, actually, the pedagogy is not all over the place. And the instruction is not all over the place. So we really started a journey together where Marietta 4.5 years ago might have been all over the place. Now, literally, we're recognized as one of the state leaders in literacy. And the state of Georgia and the Department of Education has modeled across the state what we're doing in Marietta. So for us, it was about, and it goes back to your question, for us, it was about an unwavering commitment to what is the pedagogy behind. And let's get away from the science of reading, because some people think that's a program or a box you can buy. It's actually more about what is the science and the pedagogy behind how you develop the reading brain. Right. And how does that evolve from, in our case, we work all the way down to birth, but pre-K and then into K-5 and eventually up to middle school and high school.
Right.
And for us, you asked about a core reading program, we were headstrong in the first 3 years. We were not going to go out and buy something. We always believed that our people were more important than a box that we could purchase.
Love it.
So we spent the first 3 years leaning in extremely hard to what is the pedagogy behind the science of reading and how do we develop the reading brain, and what are the unwavering principles that we will have, and how do we structure classrooms, Tier 1 instruction, intervention, what have you. And it wasn't until fourth year, which is this year, that we finally purchased a core reading program. And for us, we never wanted to do that on the front end because it was literally cart before the horse. It was the idea that we couldn't be critical consumers of curricular content until we knew the pedagogy better than the publishers. And then once that happened, then we could decide where is Marietta in our literacy journey and what are the instructional resources that complement that. So it was, to your question about tier one instruction, it was an absolute double down on in tier one instruction, what does sound pedagogy look like? And what are the processes that we build to make sure the experiences for kids are consistent, but when they need intervention, they're appropriately differentiated.
Okay. Yeah. And how did you make that shift? You're having the conversation about it. Your pedagogy is maybe there, maybe your implementation, your structure was all over the place.
Yeah.
Are there specific steps that you can kind of outline for the audience?
Yeah. I mean, I breathe deep now. I take a deep breath now as I answer your question 4.5 years later. And I'm pleased that we're a model for the state of Georgia.
Right.
But we weren't that when we started. There was a lot of gnashing of teeth. And quite honestly, for me, Jeff, it required me to get coached up as a superintendent and as a leader. I had to understand enough to know what direction we were pointing the district. There were a lot of people who had loyalties to Columbia College and Lucy Calkins and everybody else.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, relative to change management, I had to say unequivocally to our principals and then eventually in front of our entire staff, this is what the science says. And we are not going to get into a reading war. We're actually going to say in Marietta, we're going to do this. And if you don't believe in that, then maybe you shouldn't wear blue and put an M on your chest. And it's actually, I mean, I'll draw a parallel, and it's deeply personal for me. I have a 9th grade daughter who, when she was 1 year old, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Wow. And today she's happy and healthy. But I remember when the doctor came into our room when she was 11 months old and said, all right, now we have to start the chemotherapy. There was never a conversation about what the science said was the best chemotherapy for our daughter to eventually cure her. It wasn't that we had different people with competing ideas. There was an unequivocal commitment to, we are going to do what the science and the research says to cure cancer. So take that parallel now. What happens is people have loyalties. I mean, listen, education, if we look over our shoulder and look at the last 20 or 30 years, there's like a graveyard over our shoulder of all the education reform that has failed.
Right.
And people are constantly looking for the next thing with a label, the next thing they can buy, the next thing that comes in a box. For us, the parallel back to like my daughter's experience in the hospital is exactly what I said, which was, what does the science say, not about curing cancer, but around literacy? And if we learn to read, on what the science says about developing the reading brain, then we're not arguing about that anymore. We're going forward. So the change management and kind of the leadership for me was, we had to know it well enough. And that's really where we hitched our wagon to the Atlanta Speech School. I was not, and I still very humbly say, I don't believe that I'm an expert in reading. What I know, though, is we know what the science says and the research says about developing the reading brain and helping every child reach their fullest reading and writing potential. And that's what we're committed to. So in Marietta, we weren't going to argue about which publisher. We weren't going to argue around which research. It's pretty clear. And that's what we've been the last 4 years. And once we had a North Star, then everything fell in place. And then we could start to align tier one instruction and intervention and personnel and principals meetings and resources accordingly.
Because you have a framework now. You have an understanding of where you're going to go forward. Okay, that's great. Well, what are some of the things that you're doing? Maybe talk us through what a literacy block looks like, or just kind of walk us into a building and what does it look like literacy-wise?
Yeah, so I think to understand literacy in Marietta, you have to first kind of acknowledge some of the values that we have. So let's assume for a moment, every teacher has potential or they're not with us, right? Fair. And every teacher has a commitment and an unwavering belief in the pedagogy that guides developing the reading brain, which we really align to the science of reading. Scarborough's rope is like fundamental in this district.
Love it.
So for us, it's about creating first job-embedded professional development. Okay. So we set teachers up for success. We don't do a training in July and then talk to them again when the test scores come out. So for us, we have a week-long rotation where we have coaches and facilitators that are assigned to specific schools, some of whom are full-time in those schools. 1 week a month where we will focus on different aspects of the science of reading, different fundamental principles. And in our case, as we launched this 3.5, 4 years ago, we had imagined 1 week a month, job embedded PD, focused on the pedagogy, focused on the practice, and then focused on the reflection.
Did you have in-house talent that did that? Did you bring in outside?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Expertise? So the answer to your question is we cultivated our own in-house talent. I will tell you this. Reading experts might have been unicorns 4 years ago. Now they're walking every building. So to answer your question very practically, in our school district, we have different layers. So we would eventually end up hiring someone who for our district serves as the director of structural literacy.
Right.
One person. That's new. We didn't have that before. Right. We had an operations, we had a finance, we had special ed, but if we value literacy, we have someone focused on that work. So imagine in our district of 9,000 people, 9,000 kids, there's a director focused on structural literacy. We have 8 elementary schools. Across our 8 elementary schools, we have 4 reading facilitators. Each one has 2 schools. Their job is to be the coach on steroids, who once a week, 1 week a month, they're in the school, side-by-side coaching, looking at data, looking at resources, implementation, classroom walkthroughs. I'll talk more about that in a second. And then inside each building, so those are people, director, you have a facilitator who shares 2 schools. Then inside that building, you might also have a reading or an ELA coach that's assigned to that school full-time using allotments that we have at the school. So you can imagine there's a structure. And our belief is the principal is seamlessly integrated into this work. So you then have, again, in a smaller district, but I don't have any more money than anybody else. It's just our time and our money, our reflection of what we value. So for us, we value a seamless process where we make sure that teachers have support and all those people are doing classroom walkthroughs on a regular basis. So if the cycle, we call it a cycle week, if the cycle last month was around fluency, then we're going to have a classroom walkthrough that is dedicated to fluency. And we're going to make sure that what we taught teachers, we see a degree of implementation relative to the specific school skills that we taught them. So it has been now year 4 of a consistent methodology, consistent North Star. Job embedded PD, focused on tier 1 instruction. And then we have layered additional support around interventions, which I can talk to when it's appropriate. But that's really been how we approach literacy. It is, we say all day, every day, unapologetically, our number 1 priority is the safety of students and staff. After that is literacy. And some people have been like, well, we prioritize more positions for literacy than we have for math or behavior. Can I be honest with you? Like, we got elementary schools that saw a 300% drop in discipline. And they were the second highest achieving school in the entire state in 3rd grade literacy. Literacy shot up, achievement shot down. We've actually seen across every grade level, as we've had success in literacy, we've also seen success in math. So it's really, in so many ways, the great equalizer.
The tide that rises the boats.
So we've been very unapologetic about putting our time and our money and our resources and ultimately our job embedded PD into supporting teachers so they have the pedagogy. We've said it all along. We don't want any teacher. Our teachers are smarter than a program. So we lean into that and then use the programs as supplement when necessary.
That's excellent. Love hearing that. How do you think about intervention, since you kind of brought it up? Great tier 1, great, pedagogical instruction that happens right from the beginning. When there are times that, maybe something falls through the cracks, or however you think about those gaps being formed, whether they come in through transient populations or however it is, what happens then? How do you guys think about intervention?
Yeah. So maybe I'll frame it in terms of 2 parts, because you're right. As even with the most talented teachers who are reading specialists, again, not that we don't fly them in. We actually build our own.
Developing.
So we build capacity. But let's acknowledge that even when you have the very best teachers of reading and writing walking your building, spending time with kids, there are kids who don't respond. There are kids who move in that have gaps, whatever the case may be. So in our district, we really approach that 2 ways. First was around personnel and time and scheduling. So while I told you about the job embedded PD and the cycle weeks and all these other people, what I didn't tell you about was the 37 reading specialists we hired last year. What we did was we went to all of our 8 elementary schools and we looked at grades 1 through 5. And we said, how many kids in grades 1 through 5 are reading below grade level? And if we wanted to give those kids an additional, beyond the initial tier 1 instruction, an additional 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week, any kid reading below grade level in Marietta gets an additional 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week, in a class size of 1 to 10 or less. So what we did was we hired 37 people, placed them in schools based on the number of kids in that school that were reading below grade level in grades 1 through 5, and we doubled down on the intervention time.
Wow.
More time with teachers who were reading experts for kids who would have more contact time. Again, 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week, in addition to the tier 1 instruction, in a class size of 1 to 10 or less. So for us, that was one dynamic. Put personnel, align our personnel, our schedule, and our time to serve those kids in smaller groups. But the other part, which is leveraging really the EdTech tools, and for example, in our elementary schools, we use Mindplay. It's the idea of how can we seamlessly integrate that as a supplement to teachers who are reading experts. And for us, we have outpaced Metro Atlanta in reading growth over the last 3 years. And we believe it's because of that combination, not just of tier 1 instruction, but also of intervention.
Yeah, that's great. And to those that would say, wow, Grant, that's awesome, but that's unaffordable. How do you choose, or how do you make that work?
Yeah, this question always gets me a little spunky because I think somebody thinks that I get to walk out of my office to the parking lot and there's some money tree out there. Quite honestly, there's not.
Okay.
We have the exact same funding formula. We have partners who have wanted to partner with us as philanthropic partners, but that's not funding 37 reading teachers.
Right.
Not even close. That was initially seeded through CARES money.
Okay.
That was the federal funds that were allocated during and post COVID. But now, at the end of the day, and I say it all the time, your budget is a moral document. And it's a reflection of what you value. So for us, if we believe that helping a child develop their reading brain, reach their fullest reading and writing potential, will help them across every other indicator, from academics to attendance to behavior, then we have to have our budget reflect accordingly. So honestly, Jeff, we cut other positions in our district, so therefore we could afford those people that we think will more significantly move the needle. And again, it's kind of a combination. Let's make sure our teachers have the pedagogy and the resources.
Sure.
And then second, where we need interventions, let's make sure that our people have the ability to be successful with smaller class sizes, more resources, and what have you. So for us, I would say to any district, proportionally, you can do it. We've had to cut, and I think to date it's almost 35 positions. We've had to cut positions to be able to afford literacy specialists, but candidly, that's a reflection of what we value.
That's a commitment to what you value. I love it. Okay, let's think about some of the other challenges that you face in implementation of great instruction. And we're a software company here at Mindplay, so we talk about software a lot on the show. Anyway, so let's just talk about technology, maybe broadly. What does technology look? Obviously, you mentioned that you use one of Mindplay's programs in some instances, but what do you try and make sure that everybody has a device? Kind of maybe just give us an overview technologically of Marietta City.
So let me maybe just acknowledge a dynamic that probably is not unique to Marietta, and then I'll talk to you a little bit more about the devices to answer your question about the interventions.
Okay.
So let's acknowledge that in many classrooms, K-12, we became screen dependent during COVID.
Sure.
Maybe that was virtual, maybe that was when we came back. And while I do believe there's a place for technology in classrooms, we had to come back and integrate into classrooms and make sure that we got back to building relationships between teachers and staff and not have a dependency on a screen. Like no one fell in love with a screen, right? We none of us, when we grew up, like we connect with the teacher who changed our lives. We didn't connect with the size of the screen.
Right.
So for us, there was an acknowledgement that we had to prioritize direct instruction. But we also recognize that the supplemental and intervention side of it is important. So to answer your question, in Marietta, we are one-to-one. Okay. So during COVID, we were not one-to-one prior to COVID, but within the first month, we dished those Chromebooks
found a way to be one-to-one pretty quickly.
You better believe it. We handed them out like library passes. So we are now one-to-one in our district. So every child has access to a Chromebook. what that means for us is that we believe there are opportunities, and Mindplay is an example. So let's unpack this just for a half second.
Okay.
When you start looking at what we believe around the science of reading, and you look at the fundamentals of Scarborough's rope around word recognition and language comprehension, for us, we believe that the additional 15 minutes a day, 60 hours over the course of the week, is a complement to what's happening in Tier 1. It's happening in what we call our reading intervention, those 37 teachers I told you about,
Right.
because those directly align to fluency and to those other fundamental skills that we believe are important. And that's really been our leverage in Marietta. So yeah, we're one-to-one. We value the relationship with the teacher, and yet we also recognize that there's incredible opportunity to leverage EdTech tools where it's appropriate for kids.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talked about in our pre-meeting was the challenge with devices, personal devices that kind of happen. So walk us through your journey. What's happening? How do you think about that? And why have you maybe made some of the decisions that you have?
Yeah, so let's maybe step away for a hot second on Tier 1 instruction. Although let's acknowledge it's directly relevant to Tier 1 instruction, right?
Exactly.
So just it's like, where do you start? Okay, so I am a dad. At the time, I was a dad of a first grader and a fourth grader. And I read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, and I couldn't put it down, and I couldn't sleep.
Yeah, I was like, it's stressful.
Oh my gosh. I was like, what have I done to my own kids, and what am I doing as a superintendent, right? But all jokes aside, in Marietta, we made the decision to limit student access to cell phones in grades 6 through 8.
Okay.
What we did for our case, this may not work for everybody, but
Sure.
we purchased the Yonder pouches, which are these pouches where kids can secure their phones.
Yep.
And it's been fascinating. So we launched it this past year in August, and now as we record this together, it's the first day of March, or last day of February, well, 1st of March, and we have had. I mean, we are working with Emory University and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, which is a large child healthcare group here in Metro Atlanta, and they're doing a research study on how have our limitations in middle school impacted students, staff, and families. And I remember after they did a group of focus interviews at our school, they called me and they said, I have 3 things to say to you. They said, 1, teachers report that it's a completely new student, completely new classrooms, and completely new school. And so for us, the data has been compelling. The average kid in middle school and high school gets 237 notifications a day. The most recent research that came out talks about kids being on their phone an hour and a half during the school day. Wow. It's mind-numbing. Wow. Kids are addicted. You've got the smartest people in the world developing algorithms to suck adults and kids in. And many adults can't stay off their phone. We're not 11, 12, 14, 16 worried about what kids think about us on social media. So for us, we've had incredible success. 68% of our teachers this year will report compared to last year. Last year, no pouches in middle school. This year, pouches. 68% of our teachers will report that they are less stressed and better able to do their jobs because they're not the cell phone police. And again, just to clarify, in our district, across our 2 middle schools, when kids show up in the morning, they pouch their phones. They do not unlock them until the end of the day.
So it's bell to bell.
They're all day long.
No lunchtime access, anything
No
like that.
lunchtime.
Bell to bell. Okay.
Let me tell you something. I used to walk into a middle school cafeteria as superintendent, and every kid had their head buried in their phone during lunch.
Right.
When I go into the middle school cafeteria now, it's the loudest I've ever heard it, and I can always count on my group of boys in the far right corner. They've made these paper footballs, and they're all flicking them back
to
and
playing
forth.
football.
So I say all that because the teachers, 68% of the teachers said they're less stressed and better able to do their jobs. Fascinating. If I ask our 8th graders, hey, how are your classrooms today compared to last year? We do this health survey in our district across the state of Georgia as well. 22%, there's a 22% improvement on kids saying that they are better able to learn in classrooms now compared to then. So we can certainly talk about literacy in Tier 1 instruction. I believe with my whole heart as a superintendent and as a dad that cell phones and social media are a distraction. And in Marietta, we're addressing that 6-8. We're really right smack in the middle of looking at that for 9-12. But Jeff, I think it's a critical conversation. It's not just about Jonathan Haidt's book on how to raise kids.
Right.
It's actually an educational leadership discussion around what do we believe about our schools and what hill are we willing to fight on.
Yeah, no, I love the conversation. And I think for us too, as an EdTech provider, we feel an obligation to not just provide pedagogically sound curriculum, but how do we help partner with districts in, are there ways to help remove distractions? Are there, because it is something that weighs on me. And I think that sometimes it's behooving of you to push on me and our community to do better for schools, because it's a big challenge. We can't get to great sound instruction if we are distracted all day long. It just doesn't work.
It's interesting, right? So when I think about these evolutions of kids and families, I feel like it almost feels generational to me. And my kids are younger, maybe yours are not. It's like when I look at families, there are families of kids who are in college and in high school when their kids are currently in high school and college.
Right.
And they will say, like, cell phones kind of hit us and social media hit us and we didn't really know and we didn't quite understand. And now you've got younger families, particularly in elementary and middle school, who are saying, wait a minute, like, I can see high school kids who would prefer to talk to their friends and their parents via text,
right,
or direct messaging than they do face to face. Jeff, I have the privilege of shaking 600 hands every year at graduation. A majority of those kids can't shake my hand or look me in the eye.
Don't even look you in the eye.
And I think generationally, younger families like myself, I have an elementary and a middle school age child. I don't have a high school kid. I think we are going, I don't want that. And going back to your point about like EdTech and I think we're at a critical moment. Think back to like 30, 40 years ago when people thought it was cool to smoke. And now you're shaking your head going, wait a minute, how could you do that?
People used to smoke on airplanes?
How could there ever been a school in America where kids were allowed to smoke outside? and I feel like that's kind of our moment now with cell phones and social media. I don't think we've realized as a society how quickly this tsunami has taken over us. So the question becomes, turn it back to what I appreciated was a reflective moment regarding EdTech.
Right.
So while we all clamor to do all the things that we have to do inside schools, as EdTech is invited into our schools, what's their opportunity to lead this conversation? And what's the EdTech responsibility to help find solutions? Right now, the solutions are all on me as a superintendent or somebody else as a principal. But this is an issue for all of us because they're not accessing valuable resources because they're so distracted on their Chromebook or on their MacBook Pro or on their phone. So I think it's a real interesting moment that we have to meet. Listen, we stopped smoking.
Right. We can do this.
We stop marketing.
We wear seatbelts now.
Right. And now it's this idea of like, now we're having not the cigarette version, but the cell phone version of it. Anyway, I think it's a fascinating conversation. And I would really challenge the EdTech space to say, well, how do you help us? What does that look like?
Yeah, I love that. And I love to create space for that conversation because I do think that we have a responsibility, and I appreciate willingness and candor to push us on that. And it's a collective effort, right? There's standards and other things that we can look to try and do better. My goodness, we could talk forever about a number of things, but maybe since we're here, I'll just give us a chance to wrap up with a final question around your vision of a future. You just kind of laid it out, maybe some things that critical moments where we're at, but are there other things that you think about or what do you see 5 to 10 years out that you really want us to kind of focus on, or that you think we should stop focusing on because it's not just paint us a picture for 5 to 10 years from now and how you think about it.
So let me maybe go back as I think about the next 5 to 10 years and go back to literacy for a moment, because that's where we started the conversation. And then we can maybe branch out from there. For me, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of pedagogy, a lot of practice, a lot of resources around K-5 literacy. There's even less around middle school literacy. And there's even more, even less than that, and like more confusion around what to do for high school kids. I mean, what do we do it's one thing to talk about a kid a year or two below grade level. But I got high school kids, for whatever their circumstances, who are sitting in ninth grade reading at a second grade level. So I think there's a broader conversation around how do we help every child reach their fullest reading and writing potential K-12.
Okay.
We talk about it K-3, we prioritize it K-5, we might even dabble K-8, but we're not having that conversation in 9-12. And I think that is a significant concern. Jeff, I'll speak for ourselves as we hold the mirror up in Marietta. So we've got 34% of our 10th and 11th graders who are not reading on grade level, but yet we're socially promoting them. We might even give them a high school diploma.
Sure.
So I think the question, long term is, again, I shared the values in Marietta. Safety is number one and literacy is number two. So if literacy is a North Star and a value for this district, how do we help every kid K-12 as opposed to saying, well, we're focused on third grade. There's a whole lot of kids we're not serving who are going to go to college or career who have a responsibility to be literate and write well, and we owe that to them. I think in Marietta, but I think more broadly than that, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we have got to figure this out. So we've stopped the reading wars in elementary, but we haven't figured out what it looks like in middle and high. And I don't know that we've leveraged all the available resources.
Sure.
I think that's a conversation. I will also say, just separate from literacy and maybe even separate from cell phones, which you're right, we could talk about that a bunch. We have got to keep educators in the profession.
That's such a good point.
Because what's happening is they have all this pedagogical knowledge and they're building these relationships with children, but yet they're exhausted.
Right.
The turnover, you can look at national data around teachers who will stay in the profession. It's concerning.
Yeah.
So I think that's something we have to look at. That's why the right resources are important. Excuse me. The distractions like cell phones and otherwise are important. We've got to set teachers up for success.
Wow. That's a great vision of the future. And I think that we have some things where we're going, but the exhaustion right now is pretty high. And I think we have a lot of work to do to get there. And I appreciate you pointing us in that direction. Grant, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you for taking time. And I look forward to hopefully maybe doing it again soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear from you. Learn how we help students by identifying and removing phonological barriers at mindplay.com.